Welcome back to Shadows of the Past, where we shine our light on the shadows of history. I chose today's episode after becoming genuinely angry over the events that happened and how remorseless the killers acted. James Byrd Jr. was just a man trying to exist and provide for his family when an act so vile occurred that politicians wrought a new law into existence. And you know, if a politician is doing something good, then things have gotten pretty messed up. So buckle up, because this one's going to get pretty rough, and I truly mean it. We'll get to know the unfortunate victim and the tragedy that befell him, then touch on the investigation into the racist pieces of crap that perpetrated the crime, and then we'll go over the trial and the tragedy that his legacy has left. And of course, you'll get my angry ass thoughts at the end. Now come with me and delve into the shadows. This all starts in an extremely small town in 1998, small enough to have less than 7,000 in its population, and nestled between a swath of forests near the border of Texas is Jasper. It began with 30 families settling it by 1830, eventually becoming a major headquarters for the Confederacy during the Civil War, its shadow reaching over the 9 surrounding counties. And as you'll find out, that shadow never quite left. This is James Byrd Jr., 3 of 8 children. There was a lot of love in the household. He was even born to a deacon and a Sunday school teacher, with religion obviously being a prime factor in the household. And it was through the church that he would find his love of music. He would often play piano and belt out in song during church services, finding an artistic outlet through worship at the New Bethel Baptist Church. He would often try to entertain others with jokes or musical performances, often being called to perform at parties and events. He just wanted to make people around him smile. James would breeze through school. It came pretty easy to him. His mother would talk about his potential to be president, but doesn't most of ours. And it was in school that he was part of a different kind of history. He graduated from the last segregated class of Jasper Row High School in 1967. So not exactly a great history to be a part of, but history nonetheless. And it was because of his good grades that his parents pushed him to attending college like his older siblings. But this was not the life that he would find. James would marry and have 3 wonderful children, protecting them like he often did his other siblings. But he would not be just the life of the party at home. He would use his charismatic personality to sell vacuum cleaners, most people talking how he could sell you the shirt off your back. He was just that smooth. He wouldn't be able to let go of that charisma though, and would often go to parties to drink and have fun. There would be strain on the marriage, leading to divorce. He would also, unfortunately, suffer from seizures, eventually putting him on disability. It would be the reason he would never be behind the wheel of a car, just always walking around town, becoming a regular sight. When spoken of, people painted him as a flawed individual who was quite the character and just wanted to make everyone laugh. And aren't we all flawed in our own ways, just looking for new opportunities to better ourselves? And I'll also repeat what the family has said over the years. James never hurt anybody but himself. Which, honestly, that one cuts deep. And I think a quote from his sister Mary will paint the best picture. He was my big brother. He loved people. He was very people-oriented. As a matter of fact, he was the kind of person who never wanted to be alone. He would walk up to a group and join right in. He was very intelligent. People in the family told him he never used his full intellect. I would get upset with him at times, just like anybody else, he had his faults. But the most harm he ever did was to his own self. He was never the kind to harm others. He just never took care of his own personal health. We just thought that he should eat more and rest more, that sort of thing. And he would usually be the voice of peace for Sister Betty, asking her to shrug off the slurs and hate speech thrown her way, to avoid violent responses. And so it came as quite the surprise when the police called to talk to her about James. And she would need that same serenity that James would give her when receiving the news of what had happened to him. The sheriff had arrived to a grotesque scene that Sunday morning. It was not what he had expected. originally told it was a hit and run, it was obvious what had happened was far worse. The deputy had thought the trail on the ground was tire marks. Instead, it was that of a dragged body, with 75 separate body parts strewn throughout the logging road. Soon after, finding the clearing in the woods where it looked like a fight had broke out. The ground had been disturbed and a broken beer bottle lay nearby. There were also a few other items littered in the area, including a lighter with the word possum inscribed on it, the two S's being etched to look like a Nazi SS. It wouldn't take long for the police to figure out who that lighter belonged to. He had been in prison very recently, and the police would catch him and the other two perpetrators before nightfall, one getting stopped for a traffic violation, and a search revealing damning evidence. But before that, they would be just down the road, having a barbecue. You know, just like the good old days when the slave masters would have barbecues after lynching their slaves. Pieces of shit. I can't believe that they would drag him in and tie him and do this to him and do all the fucking shit. I can't believe they got a woman. Oh my fuck. The lighter would belong to John William King, or as he was known in prison, Possum. I'm guessing because his face looked like that. You know, like George Jones hunched Ben Shapiro. Unfortunately, he didn't have their same tendency to walk into oncoming traffic. He had dropped out of school in the 10th grade after his mother died of cancer. That event would turn him into a ticking time bomb. King would have a huge turn in his life after being arrested in 1997 for burglary. A 2002 Washington Post article reported that while King was in jail, a Ku Klux Klan affiliate group, the Confederate Knights of America, conspired with guards to drive King into their group. He would be placed in a section of the jail with a higher black inmate population, which honestly is any jail, but I digress. There he would be assaulted and then run into the waiting arms of the CKA, which I will say is absolutely horrendous, but not a reason to do the things that this man has done, though it does provide context to why he may have done it. He would dive into the white power group head first if his tattoos were any indication. He had Aryan pride on his torso along with the CKA symbol, which included a woodpecker in a KKK uniform and a black man hanging from a tree. At least he made it easy to identify that he was a head, and he would not be the only one at the barbecue that was part of the CKA and had some god-awful tattoos. There was Lawrence Russell Brewer, an elder and career criminal that King grew close to while in his time in prison. They had been in the same unit and tried to safeguard themselves from the other inmates, ultimately joining along with King in the CKA and branding his own skin with their racist logo. Other inmates describing him as a psychopath. Sounds like a fun guy. He had gotten out of prison not too long ago and met up with John William King. Together, they would room up with the last perpetrator of the crime and the one driving the truck, Sean Allen Berry. He had a similar record to the other two, a high school dropout who was in and out of jail, never able to hold down a job, usually working as a day laborer. And it was his apartment that the three would stay in, and was being evicted from. And even though he didn't have any racist tattoos or any outward symbols, I definitely believe you are the company you keep. And if you live with two big pieces of trash like this, then it's garbage day. And thanks to all three being in one convenient location, the police were able to collect a good amount of evidence. Inside Barry's truck, they found tools that matched the wrench with his last name on it. They also found Byrd's DNA on blood splatters around the car. Even more being on the clothes of the killers hidden away in their apartment. And there would be the drawings and writings done by King. He had dreamed about starting his own hate group right there in Jasper, with himself being the Grand Cyclops. Brewer would be full in for King's hate-driven tirade, with his own collection of King's violent rhetoric. And despite the men turning on each other, like killers and groups often do, the police were able to cut through the crap and eventually establish what exactly had happened. And what had happened was barbaric and downright despicable. It was June 17th, 1998. Bright lights from the front of the house illuminated James and another woman as they danced at the party going on around them. The song soon ends and James decides to head home, his head still swimming in the euphoria from the drink and dance. He says goodbye to his friends and starts his long walk home, taking even longer for James due to the missing toe from an accident in his youth. Being 59, the age also didn't help, and it was around 2 a.m. when King, Brewer, and Barry passed James in their pickup truck on Martin Luther King Boulevard of all places. They had been drinking and joyriding looking for some trouble to get into. Barry stopped to give James a ride. I imagine he frequently saw him walking around town. James climbed into the bed of the pickup. King didn't like any of this and had some words with Barry, who just ignored it. After a bit, they stopped at a convenience store to relieve themselves and grabbed some road beers. They went back to the truck, and King took over driving. The pickup truck would find its way to a logging road, the beam of its lights just barely illuminating the pitch blackness. After a few minutes, the pickup would abruptly stop. They would yank James from the bed of the truck. They would severely beat him, each crack of their fist or foot off James' helpless body resonating in the quiet. King would pull out a black spray paint can and cover James' face in the paint, choking to breathe as the aerosol spray clouded his vision. The three would then continue to degrade him until he was nothing. They would pull his pants and underwear around his ankles, and then they would piss and shit on him. They treated James like he was even less than an animal. Some vile shit, and we're not done yet. They would then grab a chain from the pickup truck and wrap it around James's ankles. That is when they got back into the truck and proceeded to drive 3 miles with James being dragged against the asphalt. He would fight hard for his life. Forensic evidence showed no damage to his skull, which means he was conscious the entire time. He would prop himself on his elbows to keep his head from bouncing off the road. This caused his elbows to be ground down, flesh slowly eroding into the white bone underneath. The grinding of bone against the asphalt almost as loud as a truck's engine, and he would continue on like this, being bounced and dragged, fracturing ribs until his defenseless body was slung into the culvert. His head and arm would then be severed by the culvert, viciously ending his ride of terror. James would finally get some peace while the murderers proceeded to demean his body even further. They would drag his torso to the local church down the road, one with a predominantly black congregation. They would then mutilate the body even worse and then throw it in front of the church, leaving this man's torso out in the open for everyone to find, to shame him, to reduce him to nothing. A man that was simply trying to walk home after a party. And that's when these walking chodes left for the barbecue. I can't even fathom what kind of dog shit person you have to be inside to do the things that these men did. To disassociate so much that you make a person into an object of torture purely for just existing. It's so gross. And that's a understatement. And this is where we left off. The police eventually caught up with these walking skid marks that they would put behind bars. The trial would begin, and to no one's surprise, it was awful. The prosecuting attorney's opening statement included an appropriate description of the events, comparing it to a lynching. 3 robed riders came straight out of hell. Instead of a rope, they used a chain. And instead of horses, they used a pickup truck. And it wouldn't be long before one of these robed riders got called to the stand and would do everything he could to weasel out of the consequence. Barry would take the stand to try to minimize any involvement with the crime. He said he wasn't racist, and it was the other 2 that had fully committed it. He would tell the jury that King and Brewer would have fun and acting like they were having a good old time, including Brewer looking back to laugh hysterically at James' mangled body bouncing off the road. Hilarious. The jury seemed to believe what he was saying, with Barry getting life in prison, still claiming he was only the driver and was frightened by the other 2 men who tried to intervene. Aw, don't be so hard on yourself there, Superman. You could have only driven off at any point in time for help. But I guess those big scary men sitting around 5'6" and 140 pounds were quite the roadblock. Pathetic. He was originally caught by police for a traffic violation, which means at any point during the joyride he could have gone straight to them to report the crime. The amount of complicity is insane. King would also be brought up. We'd learned that he had a copy of the Turner Diaries and said he was starting it early the night of the murder. The Turner Diaries being a fiction book carrying a lot of racist ideas, including starting a race war. The Unabomber also being someone who drew inspiration from this book in starting his own war. King was flippant and unapologetic about everything that had happened. When asked if he had anything to say to the family of the victim, he responded, "Yeah, suck my dick," which sounds like the tact of a man who committed a crime this heinous. More letters were uncovered showing King's desire to start his own hate group within Jasper, and this event seemed to be the thing that he hoped would kick off the race war and drive people to his ignorant-ass friend club. And another member of that friend club would fight his sentence. At first, Brewer would try to deny his involvement and say that he had actually tried to fight back and help but was outnumbered. Aw, poor soul. He also said that Barry had cut James' throat before they started dragging him. Both of these would prove false from the evidence provided. Brewer then let loose with a lot of hateful statements during the trial, confessing to wanting to kill more and stating that he had no regret for anything he did. There was even a letter confiscated that read, "Regardless of the outcome of this, we have made history. Death before dishonor. Zig Heil." Sounding pretty innocent. For his efforts, and like King, he got the death penalty. He would also appeal the sentence several times despite his statement of the opposite. Another coward pretending to wear a mask of bravery. This human turd also got last meal rights revoked for other inmates. When asked about his last meal on death row, Brewer ordered 2 chicken fried steaks, a triple meat bacon cheeseburger, a large bowl of fried okra, a pound of barbecue, 3 fajitas, a meat lover's pizza, a pint of ice cream, and a slab of peanut butter fudge with a bunch of crushed peanuts. And of course, when they brought it to him, he said he wasn't hungry and didn't eat any of it. A petulant child until the end. The trial made national news, drawing in crowds of people and support from well-known celebrities and politicians of the time. It would also draw in 2 groups that makes things pretty tense in front of the courthouse. The first of those being the whiny boys in white sheets, the KKK. They were there to disavow any affiliation with King and Brewer, which is surprising as this seems completely in their wheelhouse. Enough that King and Brewer could make constant parallels as they were doing it. They were also here, of course, to spew their gross hate speech. The fuck all. There on the other side were members of 2 black militant groups, the Black Muslims and the New Black Panthers of Dallas. They decided to escalate things a bit by showing up with guns. Which, you know, legal in Texas. And it surprisingly didn't get much worse beyond that. No one got beyond the police barricade, and somehow no one got hurt. A member from each side was arrested for getting into a fight, but that was it. It was more of a clown show than anything, with KKK members playing racist country music, but the crowd erupting in laughter as the tape player just kept dying out. And the laughs would also continue as members would pack into a clown car and try to drive off with the Black Muslims chasing them on foot. Both groups reported being there to protect the people, but ended up only showing that they were there for the publicity. And this was not about the humiliations and tragedy of an undeserving man, but was more about themselves and garnering attention to get more members. I mean, more members means more power and money, right? I mean, that's what it's always about. But the family was done with all the hate, some finding closure with the sentence brought down upon the men. Byrd's wife and children would come forward to speak out against the perpetrators receiving the death penalty, finding that it wouldn't be justice, but more revenge. They would not be present for the executions, but would speak in a conference held before. There would be a few things about the conference that would help with the healing process and add a bit more decency to the horrible affair. The family would create the James Byrd Foundation for Racial Healing, a program set out to provide education and support for victims of hate crimes, which is pretty amazing that they're having some good try to come out of this. I'll put a link to the charity in the description, and it looks like they've done quite a bit of good, but unfortunately are having a harder time now that James's memory is fading with time. Hate crime legislation came to Texas for the first time, and it was eventually brought in on a national level. Originally conceived in 1999 due to what had happened to James Byrd Jr. and Matthew Shepard. Shepard was a gay man who was tortured, beaten, and killed for being a homosexual. Another baseless act of grotesque violence. And so it was made to expand and bring in more support when dealing with crimes motivated by prejudice, particularly based on race, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. And it would sit there for a while George W. Bush continued to ignore and veto its existence. The same way that he would ignore it when he was governor of Texas. He would repeatedly state that all crimes are hate crimes. Ooh, doesn't that sound familiar? Eventually, power would change and Barack Obama would sign the bill in 2009. Yeah, it took almost a decade for tighter laws on people not dying for just existing. Just doing the work of the people out there, guys. Fuck. But I'm happy they eventually did something. But while this healing was taking place, there was those out there that would rather reopen the wounds and let them fester. Byrd's gravestone had been desecrated many times. These asshats would inscribe obscenities or racial epithets into his nameplate or just straight up break chunks off his gravestone. It had gotten so bad that the family had to ask for a fence to be put around the grave. Made even more awful that they had to stare at the words printed on the grave and just said screw it. Those words being, be the change you wish to see in the world. These guys saw that and said, nah, I'll take the oversized shoes of the big red clown nose, please. And this fight is still going today. The fight of the quiet, traditional racism present in many of these small southern towns. I know, I was raised in one. And being in Florida, it's not too far from Texas. The prosecution already showing signs of the short-sightedness towards the issues. It would be said the death penalty is something to let people know that there's not going to be any more of this racist behavior. But that's the thing, you can't really scare someone into not being racist. Fear is usually already built in. The community itself will need to drive the change and actively want for there to be some transformation for this to ever work. That usually means putting yourself outside your own perspective and known experiences, something not everyone is always comfortable with. But without acknowledging and trying to understand first, nothing can be done. Something that seems to be happening in Jasper, unfortunately, in the decades after. The town seems to be quietly putting its head in the sand to ignore the larger issues, to feel comfortable in their sphere of safety. John Savage from Pacific Standard went back to the town in 2018. Puja Sohatra and Janetzel Hernandez from the Texas Tribune also visited in 2023. Savage spoke to the lead researcher in the oral history of this incident, Cassie Burleson, and she believes that some of it may have been due to the rise of racial polarization in news and politics. These often giving easy answers and active permission to deny what is actually happening. And denial seems king. One of the locals being interviewed mentions that he heard that it was a drug deal gone wrong and stated that it definitely didn't have to do with race. This is just factually wrong. This was never brought up by anyone, and you could be sure as hell those racist pieces of crap would have thrown Byrd under the bus if they could. The local then blames the liberal media for playing up race and lying about James Byrd's death. So I think you're starting to get a picture of the community. Fuck it, I'm gonna need to get some water. The Tribune reported that Byrd's name is rarely brought up anymore, and that his name is fading to history. It's not learned in their schools, most getting it from friends or family or members who had heard about it from someone else. But it would be brought up often by those in the surrounding cities, locals of Jasper getting questions anytime they would go out of its walls. And I think this also has a lot to do with it. The mayor probably saying the worst thing that he could. We don't want to keep rehashing it, we just want to move beyond it. But that's the issue. Racism is still well alive, especially in East Texas where white prejudice groups are still on the rise. I mean, there's still sundown towns out there. That's insane. And do I even have to bring up Juneteenth? This is just an open wound that someone is choosing not to look at and hoping it just magically heals. But most often than not, it gets infected and only gets worse. And I know everyone's kind of tired of hearing about this. I mean, another white dude talking about racism on the internet. But that's kind of the thing. Everyone is tired of talking about this. Because in the end, we mostly occupy those lower rungs of the working class, fighting each other to have the same things, while those with the means to execute this change point their finger of blame at one group or another. And they would actually have to be not selfish for once in their life, and shit, I guess that's pretty hard. Those who want the power will always fight to retain it, through whatever means, whether it be defamation or misinformation. But yeah, I'm pretty ready to get beyond all this crap and just start treating everyone like people. Please! And until we acknowledge that the horrible stuff that happened to James Byrd Jr. can still happen until there's an active societal shift. And it will never happen with blind eyes and deaf ears. And this is why I do this. I want to bring awareness to the terrible things that have happened in history and help inform through empathy. To either change someone's perspective for the better or help them see a future tragedy and help prevent it. And if not, maybe I can just turn your brain off to forget the miseries of the world for just a little bit. I know a lot of people are leaving and it's taking me a bit longer on my videos. And don't expect me to go anywhere anytime soon. I'll continue to be your guiding flashlight in this blinding darkness. Thank you for delving into the shadows with me today. Goodbye. Stop this.